To another episode of Imagine More. We're back again for another week. Got Seth here on the mic, his colorful mic, like always. And we have our a new guest host, Matthew. I want to tell you that Seth raised about Matthew and his insights. Um, and we live. If you notice on this show, we've have progressive. We have a lot of libertarians because of the common alley with a lot of the policies and so Matthew is another one who's going to break down, our current state of politics, giving how crazy it is. I don't know about you guys, but I honestly been ever since Trump got, um, ever since his inauguration, every day has been breaking news.
Yeah, every hour.
Every hour has been breaking news. So we definitely got a lot to talk about because of that. And so, without further ado, how you doing, Seth?
I'm doing good, Jesse. We might have a little bit of lag between I don't know, between this conversation, so it might be a little bit of a delay. I'm warning you guys ahead of time, but we're just gonna soldier through it, and it's gonna be a great stream. So it's been a good week for me, though. I'm just excited to have this conversation. It's been a minute since we talked about politics in depth.
Yeah. So Matthew,
With that being said,
So tell us more about yourself. Tell us how you got started in the politics, what eventually got you moving to the libertarian route. Um, just let us know, like, how did it all start?
Yeah. Oh, let me start out by saying I don't have uh, a formal education in what would align with my beliefs. Typically, you're going to find like anthropologists and sociologists and things like that. And I got halfway through college. I got my associate's degree, and I had to work because I became a dad. So, but where my journey started and how I ended up where I'm at is so coming out of high school, ironically enough, uh, I kind of was I went in the route similar to what you hear about the youth doing today, where I came out of high school and because of where I'm at, I was actually pretty hardcore Republican. I was like listening to like Sean Hannity, on the radio and stuff like that, and then like watching a lot of right wing politics because I was young. It was free, you know, uh,
Yeah.
and it was everywhere, especially where I'm at. And so um, I kind of just went through that, and shortly after that, 9/11 happened, and um, you know, galvanized the country in a way that I haven't seen since, where it just kind of felt like everyone was on the same page. 20 years later, in hindsight, you're looking at media propaganda and things like that. But um, at the time, it just kind of felt like the entire country was united. And then we went to war with Iraq, and that was a bit of a head scratcher. And then I kind of stuck with the Republican Party up until I don't know. I was watching. I started to question it probably in like '06. So I was with it up until then, but I was still kind of riding with them. But the minute that John McCain selected Sarah Palin as his running mate, I cut. I was like, I can't support this anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I was already kind of on the fence. I started watching guys like Bill Maher and things like that, and I was kind of on the fence. And
Yeah.
and I jumped ship and I went the other way. I voted for Barack Obama twice, and then eventually when Trump was inaugurated. Now, in my youth, I grew up listening to Trump. Like he'd show up on Howard Stern, or
Yeah.
he'd show up on different places, and you knew who he was. Like anyone our age that grew up in with the media atmosphere that we had, you knew who Donald Trump was, and you knew he was not a good person. And watching people get sycophantic about him really pushed me left. I mean, Obama again, kind of the benefit of hindsight. When you look at what was passed as far as that the Obamacare that passed, and it should have been universal health care. They should have pushed harder for that, and um, you can see the patterns now of Democrats not fighting for anything really, because they're just bowing to Trump right now. But it even was taking place back then. But so
Yeah.
at that point, when Trump started blowing up, and all the propaganda, all the Russian state propaganda was out on Facebook, and it was just everywhere. And there was a massive divide, and I'm literally the only person in my family that is left at all. Like my family is all pretty far right, varying degrees of right. And so they kind of bought it, and I went the other way. I went the other direction, and I started listening to people like, if you remember, Hassan Piker was doing the breakdown, and that would be out on Facebook and stuff like that. So I started listening to Hassan, and then eventually kind of went down that pipeline. I was watching Rising and things like that, and eventually it kind of helped start to shape my my political beliefs. It was stuff I already believed, but it was people that I could relate to that believed in it as well, and that were talking the talk and walking the walk. So from there, I just started reading um, Dark Money, Tyranny of the Minority. I just tried to get as deep into it and as much information as I could about it, and eventually um, listening to I don't know, Noam Chomsky and things like that, and it kind of just put me in this position that I'm at now. To backtrack a little bit more, I skipped over a part. Another thing that really um, kind of set me off in the direction that I'm in now is living through the 08, 09 economic collapse. Really,
Yeah.
I was young. I was in my early 20s, lost my house, lost my cars. It eventually, led to divorce.
Mhm.
And just watching banks and hedge fund people get bailed out while millions of people lost their homes. And I mean, and it was horrible. And it wasn't only that. At the time, I was working in construction, and when I think it was in September when the economy, or when the stock market, which is what America views as the economy, sadly, um, like it had like 3 days in a row where it just dropped like 800 points or 1,000 points or something like that. And the company that I was working for, I was a manager, and they walked around. They said, you need to cut the staff in half.
Yeah.
And that day I had to walk around and fire. I think we fired 32 people, me and another manager. And it was horrible. I mean, grown men crying. I've got kids, I've got family, and you just, it's so hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life up to this point. And I think that really kind of also helped cement the way that I view how I would like the world to be, essentially. Realizing how much, or how little rather, power we actually have over our lives. Um, you know, these bubbles, these market bubbles, they keep cropping up and popping, and then the only people that suffer are the working class people and poor people and things like that. And millionaires and billionaires continue to get bailed out. I mean, I read Too Big to Fail, and if you know what they did behind the scenes to bail out all those banks and to just let people lose their homes, it's hard to not wonder what would have happened if they would have just bailed out the homeowners. The banks would have gotten their money anyway. You funnel that money into the homeowners, the people that were losing their homes, and you say, hey, we're going to backstop you guys, pay your mortgage. The banks get paid, people save their homes, and you don't have the housing crisis that exists today. So that's pretty much how I ended up where I'm at.
I mean, it seems like a long journey. I mean, but it seems like a journey that it's a very inspiring journey, because the reality, it seems like your your ideology is really shaped on your experiences.
Yeah.
It's not, and it's not read. A lot of people, their ideologies are pretty read out to them, and and it's really great when you actually get your ideology rooted in experience, because then you're more steadfast. You know.
Yeah, I agree.
So I definitely that's awesome, man. I mean, you said something about the way crisis that it's kind of what our main topic today is about. I'm gonna say it the Southern way, which is oligarchy, but
Mhm.
but I've learned today that there's a Northern way of saying that word. It's oligarchy. So
Oligarchy,
Oligarchy.
oligarchy, yes,
somewhere in the middle. Oligarchy.
oligarchy. Okay, yes. So that's the Northern way of saying it.
I can very very minor
Yeah.
differences. But yeah, I think you raised some really good points and critiques of the system. I mean, your path is very similar to mine. I mean, I started off with very conservative, far right family, and many of them still are. And I found myself down a libertarian pipeline because I'm like, wait a minute, I'm starting to think that these guys don't really care about freedom, even though they are talking about it. So I mean, I made it very serious, and I became like an anarcho-capitalist, and I was as serious about it as possible. Then I graduated high school and went to college, and you learn a little certain ramifications of completely unregulated policies. And I mean, you can, and then if you really are consistent, like valuing freedom, it does not lead you in a rightward direction. And we've done it, we've tried it, we failed, and almost every major economic failure is a product of unregulated profit capitalism. And I mean, that's how we're pretty similar ideologically at the same place. It's like I consider myself left libertarian. Economically between social democracy, liberal socialism. I know you came on saying you're libertarian socialist, so there's a lot of similarities in that in those worldviews. And I mean, a lot of leftists tend to build their ideologies on critiques because I feel like there's so many different perspectives about capitalism. What would you see as like solutions to these problems from your perspective? That's something I would be interested to hear.
Well, I think that we've got to have we've got to democratize the workplace at bare minimum.
Yeah,
At the very least, I think that the power within the workplace needs to come from the ground up. We need to um, we need less tyranny, I guess, is the best way to say it. So strengthening the workforce through worker co-ops and things like that.
yeah,
It gives I think that provides a level of freedom for most people that um, I don't think people can really even understand. To be completely honest with you, to have a say in your workplace, as an employee at any level, and to have an equal um, stake in the company, an equal say in the company. The pay disparity doesn't it doesn't exist. I mean, to you can't get rid of pay tiers. You can't have everyone paid the
yeah,
same, obviously. That's not realistic.
yeah,
But to have it much closer and to give people a voice to care about what they do and to have everyone to pitch in to do the things that people don't want to do, I think that's the first thing that we could do is democratizing the workplace. Um,
yeah.
So I guess my question.
I agree. Oh, go ahead, Jesse. Ask your question. Sorry.
No, sorry, guys. We're working on the delay. I Before you go into your second sub area, I really wanted to know, because you said something, Matthew, about doing, and Seth also mentioned this too, developing co-ops,
mhm.
co-op workplaces. Now, for our viewers, what is the difference between a co-op workplace and a unionized workplace?
So the unionized workplace, the hierarchy still exists. Um, the pay disparity doesn't necessarily go away, and you've got a limited scope as far as what the union. I think there's agreed upon things that the union can strike for or can ask for and things like that. And a co-op would be basically joint ownership of the means of production. So having a say in what's produced, how much is produced, who produces it, how often. I mean, just truly having a voice in the work that you do on a daily basis.
Yeah. So are we talking like percentage of ownership of the business as a unionized workers?
I think it's well, so for yeah, I mean, it would be joint ownership in in libertarian socialism. Yeah, it would be joint ownership. There wouldn't be centralized ownership whatsoever.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I'll let you and Seth after that, so I'll let you go. But I think it's a great idea. I mean, I've always been a big believer that the workers should own a percentage of the company, because I think that when everyone's working together for a common element and a common goal, that it produces the most amount for whatever product you're working on, whatever corporate company you work for. So that's pretty cool how I didn't know libertarians actually believed in that co-op philosophy. Um, I didn't call it co-op. I call it co-ownership in terms of percentage of ownership in the business. But it seems like that's another form of calling it. The technical form is a co-op.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, Jesse, you keep. I think you're under the impression that Matthew's libertarian. He's a libertarian socialist. So those
Right.
are different. So regular libertarians would just be for unregulated capitalism and all that. So yeah, no, Matthew's much more akin to me. I think the main difference is I came from more libertarian market socialist ideology. I'd say I call myself liberal socialist because I don't really think that you could really ban capitalists or private enterprise, especially in the beginning. I think it's much more of a transitional period in society and more of like a general aim towards a more collective ownership, non-ownership kind of society. Because I mean, I'm ultimately more concerned over eliminating the bourgeoisie as a separate class than I am from it being a purely mandated cooperatively owned economy. I think that there's some room for mixed markets and capitalism in certain areas here and there. Different firm sizes should be allowed to be privately owned. Maybe if it's like under 50 employees, possibly, or I don't know. Maybe I haven't. It doesn't matter the exact metric, but I don't think that a purely regimented equally everything is a co-op and everything is cooperatively funded, and I don't know how easily that society could be maintained, especially with global capitalism. So I think it's more of a transition, like working a socialist market economy within capitalism. There's still trade, there's still this and that. So I think it takes a little bit of time, and I think that there needs to be a little nuance when it comes to creating a socialist society. I don't think that purely co-ops is the only way to do it. I think obviously ideas like employee stock ownership programs, like ESOPs, they work as a transitional period, to, creating more collective ownership within the private enterprise. And that I don't think that you can just seize the means of production and turn it over from the capitalists to the proletarian overnight. It's kind of like a societal shift. So
it would be
I think that there's more watered down version of socialism is one I prescribe to.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it would be, I mean, even if we achieved a socialist libertarian society, it would still take generations to even get that right. And so getting to that point, I totally agree with you, Seth. I think that you would have to start with like a social democrats or even a democratic socialist type society. That's kind of what when we first started talking, that was what I'd said. I think that the first step would be to raise the floor. right? So Americans, and I mean nobody, but since we're in America and we're talking about Americans, Americans shouldn't be allowed to fall as far as they fall. When you look at
Yes.
the housing market, the housing, like 30% of the housing market right now is owned by private equity firms for profit. I mean, they've literally the they've commodified the housing market, and that should never be allowed. I mean, it's bad enough that they've done it with healthcare, and other things that that are essential, agriculture, things like that. But the fact that it's bled into housing, and now so many people can't afford homes, and they did that off the back of the housing crisis in '09. I mean, they scooped up all these houses for cheap, sat on them, and then turned them into Airbnbs or long-term rentals or whatever. And it's creating a really problem. And if you look deep into it, another reason that occurred is because they're backstopping. I don't know if you know this, but the commercial real estate industry is still riddled with subprime mortgages. And this was never more evident than during the lockdowns for COVID, when they sent everybody home during COVID. The commercial real estate industry lost like 80% of its value after the first year, and it exposed that there were subprime, that these were all backed by subprime mortgages. So they're just repackaging these commercial properties and selling them to the same exact way they did in '09. And part of the push to go back to work is because, and part of the push to buy up all these private residences were to backstop those losses. And so I always think it's amazing, and there's nothing more evident to me. If nobody's in those buildings and the value of them drops by 80%, it's the people that work there that bring the value to those buildings.
Yeah.
And I think that there's no stronger case to close the income the income gap between us and the top, if we're the ones bringing the value. But I just don't, collectively as a people, we don't know how much power we actually have.
Yeah. And that is it's always been the, repetitive aspect of history, is the people in power already hold all the power, and that's why they maintain the power. There might be more of us, but we don't have the power to even change the
Right.
power. And that's something I mean, that's as good of a transition to the term oligarchy as I've ever heard. Like, we exist and have always existed under an oligarchy. This is not a democracy. It might be a democratic oligarchy, like there's some form of representation, but it's still ultimately controlled by the entire donor class. They're the ones that make all the legislative decisions. They're the ones that fund the people to get into Congress. And I don't know how you get around that without completely changing the way that we finance elections.
Well, I think
So, I mean, that's kind of directly led to where we are right now.
I think it's financing our elections, campaign refinancing reform. But the I think basically it's more awareness. I mean, we still don't have awareness as people think we do. We have an awareness when it comes to national politics. Like, everyone has an opinion on Trump, or everyone has an opinion on Kamala Harris, because these guys they're pretty much celebrities when you get to that level. But when you're asking someone, Joe Smo, who's your congressman in your district, I would say 80% of America can't even name their congressman in their own entire district.
Yeah.
And that's really the problem. It's just we've created a system where essentially you don't need to know who's in power, because people have turned off the light, in a sense, where they're just like, look, I just go to work, I make my money, I don't really care what's happening. As long as it's working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only time people ever get involved.
But that's
go ahead.
I'm saying that's a product of a wage system. Is under a market socialist system, you would own the shares, partial shares of the company that you work at. So if your company does well, then you do well. If your company does poorly, then you do poorly, which would give people a lot more reason to care about their industry that they're working in and to care about their jobs. And under our current system, it's like a market socialist system would fix or at least deliver all the problems, or all of the promises that a capitalist system promises, like real competition, stuff like that, like meritocracy. Under our system, it's just like you are born with money, you use that money to buy power, you use that power to maintain money and power, and then you control everybody who's born without power. And they're just sort of defeated for the rest of their life, living under a system, a wage system, working a job, not working a career that or anything that interests them. They're literally just doing it for survival reasons. And I don't think that like life and death is the only motivator to get people to work.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this, if you don't have people so deprived, we'll have a lot more more active workforce. I think that people are just a massive amount of people are just living under a depression of helplessness, and they have no say in their electoral system. They feel very defeated and don't care about their congressmen because they are basically don't have their vote has no weight anyways. I mean, we live in an electoral college system where in California you might as well not vote because it's going to go blue and it doesn't really matter at all. So care about national politics, any of these politics, when their own input doesn't matter. And then how do you expect them to think that their input should matter in a democracy when they go to a job that's controlled entirely from the top down? The managerial class is supposed to represent them and protect their interests, when really they're only interested in their own self-preservation, which is to kiss ass to the shareholders and give the people investments who invest in the companies everything they want, while the workers get screwed over every time. That's the dialectical materialist conundrum. Is the needs of the worker will always be pitted against the needs of the shareholder. There's anytime the shareholder wants to make money, that needs either the consumer needs to get fucked or the workers, and there's no way around that. And the other way around is in order for the workers to get what they deserve, the shareholders need to just step back a little bit and not be the ones winning and profiting every single chance they can. So I think that it's an inherent problem in the system that isn't inherent to markets. It isn't inherent to competition. It's inherent to a system that values privilege and values wealth and power above basic human dignity, basic common sense, things that make more sense for the rest of society instead of just the people that are benefiting from dysfunction.
Well, and we favor capital over actual productivity too. You know, for example,
Yes.
In 2021, Tesla's market cap was bigger than the next 10 major car manufacturers combined. I mean, we're talking like BMW and Honda and Toyota, like and they produced like 930,000 cars that year, when Toyota alone produced like 10 million worldwide. I'm talking worldwide numbers.
Yeah.
And Tesla was 10 times higher, 10 times more valuable than Toyota was, just because of its stock price, because of the recognition of Elon Musk. That's a broken system. That is broken motivation. That is, you know, and people don't understand how that the capital class can that they just create money like that. And I hate to say create money, because that's another thing too, that, you know, when you're discussing with you know, your Republican counterparts and people on the right, libertarians too, and they, you know, forever they blamed Biden for injecting too much money into the economy with the $1,600 checks and the infrastructure bill and things like that, and saying that that's what caused inflation, when it was absolutely price gouging. But if the logic is, if the government spending money leads to inflation, the next logical conclusion you can make is, okay, so scarcity of money brings money its value, right? I mean, so if you have billionaires in a system, I try to explain this to people all the time, if scarcity of money is what brings it its value, and you've got billionaires hoarding all the wealth, it does impact you. People don't understand why billionaires are bad. And that's exactly why. If you think about it, with any other tangible resource, let's say it was water, if you had like 20 people or 100 people that owned like 90% of the water and could charge you whatever they wanted for it, that's problematic. That's not a free society. You're subject to the whims of what those people want.
Yeah.
It's just on a big scale.
But it is more accurate to depict. Yes, money is created of its value out of scarcity, but the inflation isn't a product of the scarcity of money. Inflation is entirely decided by supply and demand, and that's why we fell apart, because of the supply crisis. Is we had a lack of products because everybody was away from work, because we're all during the pandemic, we're all shut in, so things aren't being made. So then there's a lack of things. Things become more expensive, and also things become more expensive when we have increased purchasing power, and that purchasing powers generally leads to more spending in one direction. Like, that's why the used car market became more expensive, is because when people got more money, because of whatever reason, and whatever reason people decide to buy cars, then there's a lack of cars, and so cars become more expensive. It's literally nothing to do with the amount of money in circulation. Now it does impact the value of our currency overseas, and that's something to consider for sure. But that's where taxes come into play. Taxes are not money that we spend at a federal level. The tax money is not spent. They just take it out of currency to reduce inflation, because the government's going to spend money where the government's going to spend money every time they do that. Taxation is just so that we don't have like
too much money in the system.
Yes, that's true, but it's also in the wrong places. Taxation is a way for us to get money out of the places and put it in the right places, and that's how we redistribute money. So painting money at tax money is something that's taken from a rich person and given to a poor person is such an inaccurate way to depict taxation in general. It's just not the way society runs. And
I mean, a lot of the things also with the inflation with Biden is a lot of it people don't even take account. It's just changing behavior. Is a big thing. Like, people come back from the pandemic, change their behavior. The things they once did, they don't do anymore, because obviously they created a different habit. And essentially what happens is these different habits creates a different economy than was there previously.
That's a good point.
And so different, so having a different economy, different, things being purchased, like Uber Eats wasn't a thing prior to the pandemic. Now it's a thing. Somewhat. That's just an example. But what I'm essentially saying is that inflation will take care of itself if you give it time. But when you're trying to manipulate, like Trump is doing, where it's like, oh, I'm going to get it down with tariffs, I'm going to get it down, and all that stuff is not going to get down inflation, because inflation has to take time to. It's like, I forget what the thing's called. It's like retract. It's like when you pull something and it retracts back and it pulls again. So it's essentially that's what's happening here. It's just we went to extremes, like you guys were saying. We pretty much built up a huge demand with very little supply, and then we essentially came out the gate. Boom! We wanted supply, and we couldn't make it fast enough. And guess what? People just price gouged. That's just
and that's where I was going to say.
Behavior.
I was going to say that the government allowed price gouging to happen too, which was another problem. It didn't incentivize the market to correct its supply chain issues. It just got backstopped by, backed by, not backstopped, but the government just essentially turned the other way.
Yeah,
and that affected a lot of people.
Yeah, and another point is, I don't know that it's an accurate. It's not an accurate expectation for people to think that prices will ever go back to the same number that they were before the pandemic. That's just not how money works.
Right.
If there's more money in the pool, in the bathtub, then money means different things. And so why aren't prices? Why it doesn't reflect the same amount of my income? That's because you're not getting paid anymore, and that's the reality of the situation. It's not that prices have risen as much as their value how much it's worth of the US dollar. It's that your income has not risen. So it's costing more to you on an individual basis. The problem is all this money that was brought into the system went directly, maybe not directly, indirectly, but it went into the pockets of those on top. So those people got richer during the pandemic while our income either went lower or stayed the same, and the prices also stayed the same, but the number changed on the very top. So in order for us to get back to the level we'd like to, people need to get paid in accordance to what they deserve and accordance to their own market value, which is diminishing yearly, just like the minimum wage. The minimum wage hasn't stayed the same since 2005. It's gone down because $7.25 means less now than it did 15 years ago.
Right.
So that's just how money works. If we don't not consistently giving out basic income of some sort or seeing minimum wage according to inflation, we're just going to continuously be creating wider wage gaps between those at the very top and the 90% of people who don't even own stocks, who don't even have an investment in any money saved up at all. So
see, that's where for me libertarian socialism answers a big call when you're thinking about the changing markets and the automation that's coming and AI that's available and things like that, to decentralize power, to not have to rely on a government for a monthly check or something like that, and to for workers to be able to negotiate and set their own wages within their own, let's just say a co-worker co-op or something similar. I think switching to that type of system makes far more sense, particularly for where we're at this specific time in history where, you know, self-driving cars are here. You know, Waymo is driving around. So either, I mean, the AI is here. Seth, you and Jesse, I apologize. I don't know what you do. I think. Anyway,
I worked with it.
I don't know what to say, what not to say. So, but I do IT work, and I'm constantly worried about whether or not, you know, I'm going to be automated out of a job. You know, at some point, there could be a machine that does what I do, or does at least a significant portion of what I do. I still work with people, so there's that. But at some point, either like a UBI to keep this system going is needed, or value is going to have to come out of actually the labor and the production of things we do, and we have to change the way that we view production. So if you've got a worker co-op, for example, part of your time is spent producing whatever it is. Let's say one example that's pretty popular is a cab company. That's a worker co-op. So at a certain portion of the time, they go out and they drive cabs and they generate money as cab drivers. But another portion of their time is spent on the governance of the company. So you're not just a cab driver. You've got that ownership stake in it, to where you're making decisions about the company, the ins and outs, the daily grind. You know, what routes are we going to take? Do we need another car? How much do we want to generate? Just that ownership stake in the company. And I feel like that is just a reasonable and logical next step. Because if nothing is done, and they automate away millions of jobs that will never come back, and they continue to find ways to automate out jobs, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Changing behaviors matter, and we have to study this, because one of the things that I realized is that with the pandemic came big technological changes. From Zoom, like most lawyers, and there you go. That's what I do outside of here, Matthew.
Okay. I didn't know if I should say it or not.
Most lawyers, they used to drive from courthouse to courthouse to courthouse to courthouse, right? So if I had a 15-minute motion calendar, I would have to go to Miami. If I have to go to an hour calendar in, I don't know, Fort Lauderdale, I have to drive there. Now we have Zoom. So lawyers don't even leave their house or their office from hearing to hearing in different counties. So that has changed completely the money supply. And I'm just one lawyer.
Because you can pay
IT,
more people, so you can generate more income, kind of thing.
I can generate more income,
Yeah.
right? And so it changes the money supply. And what ended up happening is I think that our economy is in this reflection point where it's like, okay, well, the things that were pre-pandemic that were there are no longer there, right? And now we have this AI coming in. You were talking, Matthew, earlier about how you worry that IT is going to get automated with some of these AI agents and AI bots, right? We're already dealing with that in the law. Like we have this software that I can tell it, hey, write this, write that, write this, write that, and then give me and make it finalized so I can send to a judge so I can read
Mhm.
it, and it can do it. That job was traditionally a paralegal who did that,
Yeah.
or a legal secretary. So their jobs are becoming, they're like almost halfway out the door, and then I was just becoming a lawyer and a secretary. And then you see that the wage gap. There used to be someone in that middle, like secretary, paralegal, lawyer, right?
Right.
Now that paralegal's gone, so now you just have a secretary you talk to, and you have a lawyer. And so, like you guys were saying, something like UBI, if you want to keep the same economic system, it's going to have to be in place because once you start taking away the middle jobs, which most jobs are middle, even lawyers, I'm a middleman, separating two people. But most of these middle jobs, what happens is we're going to start to become automated by computers. And that's going to change the reflection point of the economy. And that's going to keep prices higher.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is there's nothing that anybody can promise you from a presidential standpoint that he can change that because that's just our system was designed to work in a way that's and our technology is changing it.
Hmm.
So now what are we doing to redesign the system?
Right.
And I think that goes to the overarching theme of progressives and conservatives. It's like we want to keep things the same. Well, that's not working because in Michigan, when all those jobs left in the 90s and the 80s, we're still promising those people those jobs, and that was just basic automation of machines.
Yeah.
Now we have AI, and now you're still promising these same manufacturing jobs to people in Michigan.
Right.
And instead of trying to change the system, we keep making promises that we're going to go back. Well, conservatives make the promises. We just go back to the old way, and the old way doesn't exist. Because if I'm a business owner and you tell me, and this is me taking off the law hat, but putting on my law firm hat, me being a business owner, you're telling me I can use a computer, don't pay my paralegal, however much she makes, and then this computer, which is like $500, whatever the program it costs, I just type it in, it does what she does. As a business, I'm going to do that.
Right.
So that's natural. That's human nature to save money.
Yeah.
And it
And
also
yeah, but
raises another point about like top-down decision making is like at the end of
yeah,
the day, decisions are made by the person who has the most to gain on behalf of those who have like everything to lose. And I think
Right.
that that's where
exactly.
oligarchy is directly correlated with just like authoritarianism, straight up. And the capitalist system is an inherently authoritarian system. Like
Yeah.
even not only from a governmental perspective, but from like every single workplace is decided by these different hierarchies, all suck more power than them just to maintain your own job and position. And at the end of the day, it's the people at the bottom are getting shafted for no reason at all, and it's only because they are without power.
Mm.
And power is privilege. Power is status and freedom. It's a determinant of how much freedom you have over your own
But Seth,
life and personal self agency.
my question then, Seth, is
Go ahead.
this: if they
Yeah.
have the power, right, that you're saying, how does that stop technology from coming in and wiping out their lives? Because even if they had the ability to vote, right, how can they make a decision? Because most people, most workers don't have the capital to start a business. Most workers,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
we're asking like we want to make you a decision maker. which is you're very important to be a decision maker if you're going to work for a corporation. But at the same time, how do we take you, the individual, over the needs of the business? If the business states that automation is cheaper, faster, it gives more profit to the business, how can we convince the worker that's in their best interest to give up their job for the corporation? They're never going to do that. The reality is they're going to find a way to keep their job. You see this? You see what I'm talking about? The problem?
Yeah, that's no, I know what you mean. How like there's getting rid of capitalism doesn't get rid of the inherent like greed of the individual, but there's different. At the very worst, there's different aspects that would be like sanded off. Like for example, it takes away like incentives and like big oil corporations. If in a socialist society, it's not like the co-op that's in charge of energy wouldn't also care about their own personal profits. Like, of course, they would have reasons to, incentivize polluting or whatever for their own dollar if they're all greedy. But it does include more people in the decision-making process, and it would be less likely to be so destructive if there's more people. The transparency of like they're voting directly on something with the consequences instead of a system where like the capitalists are manipulating the media
Right.
and they're being dishonest to you about the ramifications of what they're doing so that you don't even know what you're voting on. Like they've completely manipulated all of media and completely created misinformation and miseducation that we have a society that doesn't even know what's in their best interest. So yes, there's not going to fix every problem in society, but like the most catastrophic decisions that are made by those at the very top would not be able to be made because they have to be inclusive of everybody and the people who have to deal with the consequences. So the people, there's still going to be problems in the system. There's still going to be greed. There's still going to be people taken advantage of, but it would be, you'd have to have the inclusion of an entire company to take advantage of somebody instead of just like 5 people in a smoke-filled room. You know what I mean? So there's nothing to fix all, but it would at least get rid of the worst externalities of that system.
Yeah. And co-ops too, functioning ones right now, they have to work with other co-ops or councils or things like that. So you've got a decentralized power structure where you've got co-ops that rely on one another and they share common goals and they have to work together. And they have to do so in most functioning co-ops right now. They do so in the least environmentally destructive way as well. I mean that is a point of emphasis for a lot of co-ops. So there are it's a whole different mindset when you think that way. I mean it's like it's a transformation. It's a transformation of how we conceive ourselves and how people create institutions, and the institutions created have
I
to
also think
facilitate it
that
too. So
you have less, for example, the overall gain of screwing over the environment for your, marginal increase in stock prices at your company is a little bit less tempting than being a person with $100 million stake in Chevron, and certain decisions cost you're like increasing your value by millions at a time. Like so the overall profit that a shareholder can take home, it would be completely different than under this system. That I don't think it would be as tempting to like completely fuck over the entire world because of like you might get an extra $1,000 in your share return or whatever. You know what I mean? So there wouldn't be anybody who would be getting hundreds of millions of dollars at a time. Maybe there would, but maybe no, not really. Like I'm sure there would still be NBA players that would get $100 million contracts or whatever. But like at the end of the day, there's not going to be billionaires that become billionaires overnight because of selling an entire company and the rights and the intellectual property rights of this and that and the employment contracts of thousands of workers. Like that's something that we could talk about completely separate from the economic ramifications of certain policies that capitalists do that are self-destructive. There's also just the straight up the deontological value of freedom. You have no say over your life because somebody has control over you 8 hours a day, and you have to do whatever you say. Job, you lose your insurance, and you can lose the chance of, or you could risk the chance of becoming homeless, or going into debt. The amount of families who are living paycheck to paycheck, the amount of families that don't have $500 saved up in an emergency, just keeps them in a sort of wage slave system where they have no say or any way to push back against the corporations, especially in the United States, where there is no unionization protection either. Not only do you not have a democratic say, but you can literally get pushed out for asking for more money or for asking for this and that. Like, you don't have a negotiating power unless your company is like 10 people. It's not like at McDonald's you can go and ask for a completely different wage than those at your job tier because of some sort. They can replace you overnight for somebody who's cheaper even, or more willing to work shitty hours. You know what I mean? They're not trying to benefit you. They're trying to take advantage of your work and pay you the least amount of possible. And exploitation is the goal. And that just can never work if you're expecting and relying on a company to take care of your livelihood. Like, selling over your wages and profits is a form of slavery. I mean, it's not like this, it's not chattel slavery or whatever, but you are enslaved to a system that you cannot break out of. You can't just join a socialist system. You are born into a capitalist system, and you have no choice but to sell your labor to a private corporation.
Right.
Like
and you don't get a say over the price.
People just don't have any sort of. What was
You
that?
don't get a say over the price for that either. Like, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, you don't get to go in. I mean, the margin is so small for you to get a job and be like, I think that this job and the labor that I'm going to put into it is worth, $50 an hour. when they say, nah, it's worth 17, you don't get to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Speaking of that, did you guys see that Trump basically gutted the NLRB?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's crazy.
I'm surprised. Wasn't there something like the Democrats had a chance to renominate a Democrat or something like that, and somebody like didn't show up for the vote, so Republicans had like a marginal majority, so then they ousted some Democrat or something like that. Like, the Democrats are the reason why the NLB got gutted or something. That was something I'd heard. I don't know the exact details.
I didn't see that part of it,
but
that's crazy.
Yeah, there's just I don't know. As much as Republicans are intentionally screwing us over, Democrats are not making it harder for them.
They're standing back.
Sitting back and
they're standing back. That's happens after every election. They're just trying to stand back and be like, "Yeah, he won, so we're gonna let him have these 100 days," and then they start fighting.
Yeah.
It's the same thing every election cycle. They wait those 100 days, let him do what he's gonna do, and then they're just saying, and they draw back. I mean, at the end of the day, I see what all the stuff that he's done, freezing assets, new tariffs, all these things have consequences. And a lot of people don't really know what they are at this point because they've never been tried before.
Yeah.
And no one's ever tried this. So, I mean, I just think that he's going to cause inflation to spiral out of control. And
the stock market is crashing as of today because of the tariffs that are going to be input tomorrow. But Canada and Mexico, 25% tariffs across the board. Meanwhile, the big threat, to the United States, according to Trump, is China, who he's putting 10% tariffs on.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no reason.
Well, China makes way more products that we use. That's
why.
We will feel it a lot more if China had 25% than 10%, because the majority of our product, I think 60 to 7% of our products are made from China. So we will instantly overnight see a price increase throughout the whole entire country.
which we will see regardless. From we get gas, we get oil reserves in Canada, we get produce, all the stuff from Mexico. Like, we're going to see inflation, like 100% chance. This is not even a question. The tariffs is a 25% increase in prices. That's all it is. You're increasing the prices of your product by this much percentage. So I don't know how people expect us to lower prices, because not only is he increasing the prices of what it costs you to buy stuff and companies to buy stuff from other countries, but now these countries are going to retaliate and they're going to stop buying stuff from us. Or, it's going to be more expensive for them to do so. So how on earth is this going to benefit a single person? Like, it's not just T-shirts we're buying from China. Companies are buying steel, and they're buying, things they use to create buildings and to create technology. All this stuff is going to become everything will become more expensive downstream from these decisions. And Americans are not going to forget this. Implement tariff again after 4 years, but maybe you just get out of their system. But that's riding on the hope that Americans will be educated to even know what caused this, which is what fears me. Is overall Trump's attack on the First Amendment. He's literally deporting people who have like led pro-Gaza or he's saying pro-Hamas rallies. He deported some like Chinese. There's some like lady that goes to UCLA who she led these protests, and she was like she was on like a visa studying. She's from China. She just got that. She has to get deported now just because she is a part of like the you know what I mean? Like, the free First Amendment is out the window. He's just deporting people he doesn't like and disagrees with him. So how are we ever supposed to create a viable opposition when like there's an intentional attack on the First Amendment and on the constitutional liberties of like everybody? I mean, I don't want to get thrown in jail. Like, I don't know how people are expected to stand against Trump when they've never faced this kind of authoritarian ever.
We haven't, but I mean, the courts they're working their way through the courts. I mean, a lot of that stuff, it's already been struck down. Like, a lot of his executive orders got struck down because they violated the First Amendment. So it's just a matter of letting the courts, because the Constitution is always going to trump it. And I don't care how many justices he puts in the Supreme Court. They're all conservative.
I don't know.
They're all conservatives, so they
but
have.
That only works if there's consequences. You know what I mean? Like, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
He knows what he's doing. He knows it's going to get held up in court, and while it's held up in court, he does more and more damage. And then he's going to continue to do what he wants to do, regardless of what the court says. And then what do we do? What are the consequences? Because it's like there has to be consequences, or none of this matters.
Well, he's effectively a king. Let's just be honest.
Yeah,
that's what he is. I mean, the Republicans are not gonna follow a line. Those Republicans that have been elected are all spineless. All of them are just gonna say,
totally agree.
Trump wants this, then let's get it done. So they're all spineless. Look at in Florida, we just passed a bill. Our governor put a bill, which was stupid, but he did anyway. He tried to put a bill, a super conservative bill on there. The Republicans in his own party, because I don't know if you guys know this, but our Florida, 90% of the legislature is Republican.
Mm-hmm.
So the Republican there, what they said was like, we're not going to take the governor's bill. Matter of fact, we're not even going to listen to the governor. We don't care what you say. Whatever Trump says, this is what this state is doing. so he has his bill. So we kicked out the governor's bill, and we introduced we call it the Trump bill, and then we passed the Trump immigration reform in Florida. And DeSantis is just like super mad because it's like, this is my state, and it's like, yeah, not really,
not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
And so, well, we're laughing, but it's true though. He's becoming a king.
Yeah.
And the great thing about being king is all your mistakes. Guess what happens? You own every single one of them. And I always tell people, it's like, yeah, it's bad right now, but I guarantee you, if Trump keeps doing what he's doing, he's guaranteed Democrats power for the next 20, 30 years.
Well, yeah, I was actually going to ask you that. So let's say things keep going the way they are, because I'm genuinely torn, and I haven't asked many people this, but let's say things keep going the way they are, and you know that there's a cycle and a pattern of Democrats bailing out conservatives, right? So conservatives tank the economy, Democrat gets elected, they put it all back together for the most part, worse than it was before, but still back together.
Something.
Everyone collectively exhales, Republican gets elected, serves 1 or 2 terms, crashes the whole thing again, does whatever. At this point, do we I feel like we're at a point now where we could demand a more progressive candidate from the Democratic Party. I think it's time to say, create a voting block and say, this is what we want. We are your base. If you don't do this, you're not getting our vote. I think it would be easy to form a coalition like that. And stick to it, though. I mean, damn to the fear mongering that will happen in the next election. And if they don't put up a viable candidate, don't show up for them, and let the Republicans take 28 and sleep it off, for lack of better terms, sleep one off in the drunk tank for a term. You know what I mean? Like, the Democrats don't get to bail them out. We don't enable, the neoliberals to continue to do what they're doing. Just let them have it, and just say, you know what, we're going to hell in a handbasket anyway. Or do we continue to fight and but you're fighting a two-headed beast here. You're fighting the DNC and the Republicans. How do we just stake our claim to power in the system as it exists right now, to say there are some minimums that need to be met? We need universal health care. We need antitrust to be top of the list. You got to break up these monopolies. You've got to just make it easier. You got to raise that tax rate on corporations. This is important to us. Amongst the million other things, those are just ones that came to mind. But it's a scary thought, but doesn't it sound reasonable at this point?
I think there's 2 points. I think that you could demand. We should expect that the Democrats are. I don't know that progressive is necessarily the correct term, although I do think it would be more progressive. But I think it's populist that Americans are craving, and they don't really perceive populism as a left or right thing. They just sort of think that that's like, oh, anti-establishment, whatever. If a candidate is perceived as like anti-establishment, populist, but they are more left-wing, as long as they're presented as populist, they can get elected. If they're running to the left, if they're AOC or Bernie, I don't see them actually winning. Although, like, for example, I don't know how populist this candidate is. He comes across very populist, but he was that independent that ran in Nebraska that almost won. He was an independent, but and he called himself kind of libertarian, but he was pro guns. He was pro. Sorry, that was like the right wing one. He's pro. He's pro like crackdown on illegal immigration, but then the rest of it was like pro $15 minimum wage, pro legalization of marijuana, pro gay marriage, pro this and that, pro all the things that Americans actually want and across the board support. I think that we can win that coalition pretty easily if we don't. We don't have to project ourselves as super left wing. That doesn't also mean that we need to do the Kamala strategy and be like, I've got a Glock, and immigration. We don't need to pander to the right in order to win. We just need to, not push ourselves and present ourselves as super left wing while creating the sort of policy solution that Americans are just desperate for. We don't need to push the boundaries too much. We don't need to say we need Medicare for all. As Americans just want universal health care. Doesn't mean we can't give them Medicare for all while fighting for that, but we don't need to run on the most progressive left-wing policy to get all Americans on board with. Once we're in office, we can do it. Right. You know what I mean? We can create any sort of system, just like we're seeing Trump. You don't need to lie. You just don't need to tell them everything. You just need to tell them what they want to hear sometimes. And Americans didn't want to hear just the vague pro-democracy, anti-Trump stuff that Kamala ran on. They were waiting on solutions and stuff like that. But also, the second point is I don't think that we need to be thinking about, purity testing right now, in the sense that I don't think democracy to save in 8 years. Like, I don't know how much of this you guys have looked into, but I'm like personally like 80% sure that Trump stole the election now in 2024. And
with the 3.5.
With the what?
Yeah, the 3.5 million.
3.5
You spoke
million
about
votes.
that.
Yeah.
I didn't hear about it.
Voter suppression. There's ballots that are rejected because they couldn't read them, that are flagged as like there's some rule that if you can just like question a ballot's legitimacy and they throw it out and send you a provisional ballot, and like half
Is this
of
in a
votes.
blue state or was this a blue state or a red state?
This is in Georgia. The state of Georgia. Listen, in Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene staffer, one of her staffers reported like 900 Black and Latino names.
Yeah.
As have them thrown out. So all these votes get thrown out. They get sent to provisional ballot that may or may not get read or even counted the second time around. And there's like there's polling station for like 1 million people, while like in 20,000 people get a polling station. Like it's an intentional voter suppression system, and according to analysts, there's 3.5 million votes that are missing.
I had to re-register.
That are Democratic.
I'm not even. I have to re-register.
No, I mean, we should. I mean, this to my extent. I mean, I don't even know, even if it's a third of that, even if it's a portion of that, what extent does that change the entire landscape of the election in the swing states? Because obviously none of this stuff is happening in Nebraska, because it just does not matter. There and also there was the recording of Trump. I'm sure you've seen the same thing, Matthew, where he was like, "Oh, I went to Pennsylvania with Elon, and he did a lot of campaigning for me. That Elon, he's so smart. He knows everything about computers and about those voting systems. He knows everything he needs to know about them. And you know what? We won." He talked about the voting counting, like the machines. We mentioned the machines and how much Elon knows about them. Why would that impact anything when it comes to individuals voting? He obviously also, there was what was it called, Starlink, or is that a different thing?
Starlink.
Where the voting systems Elon Musk owns. Like, we're letting private individuals own the computers that count our votes. Like, I don't want to be an election denier, but if it tracks 100% with Republican, the way Republicans, their entire strategy is just projection. And I've said this many times. It's all projection. If I accuse them of doing it first, then they look stupid for accusing me of doing what I'm doing. So
and then people do exactly what you just did, where you're like, I don't want to be called like a voter fraud guy. I don't want to be a voter fraud conspiracy. Like, it already has that stigma on it where you're like, well, I don't want to be labeled as that. I mean, back in the 2000s, that's the way it was for being like, I don't want to be called a liberal. Don't call me liberal. It's a bad word. And it's kind of the same thing here. It's like, call it what it is. You know what I mean? If this is true, it's voter suppression. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah. That was that. I didn't.
Yeah.
It's very conspiratorial, but like you said, they project so much of what they actually do onto their opposition. Like they'll point fingers and say you're doing it, and they're doing it right under your nose while they're accusing.
Because they're just trying to, like you said, they're just trying to like push them away of being accused of what they are doing. So if you if it's the other people who are doing it, who are you going to believe, them or me? Then you're at least going to get half the people who are like, it's the Republicans. Or some people will be like, they're both, like my brother would be like, the Republicans say this, Democrats say this. And it's like, that doesn't mean the truth is in the middle. That means, one of them is lying. Sometimes that's the truth. sometimes one of them is lying, and that's just the way it is. Not everything is perfectly in the middle between two people who have completely opposite
Totally
opinions.
agree.
Sometimes people just lie. That's have a history of just like we care more about the truth and about our own being humble and being meek and being always being like taking the high road, that they let Republicans create a completely different road altogether and like create shortcuts and completely upend the system while we're being good. We're the good guys in the end.
Yeah.
Well, the end is our death.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to stand up for
Yeah.
ourselves a little bit.
Well, guys, that was our show. I can tell you this. I hope you guys learned a lot. We went deep into oligarchies, or oligarchies, or any way you want to say it. And we learned
Yeah.
more of the urgency of us coming together and rebuilding our coalition, creating a new voter bloc so we can have more voice and say in our national politics. And you see that now we're starting to kind of lay out the framework. The these conversations are now starting to lay out some of the groundworks that we need to combat the power and influence of the rich on the
Yeah.
people's lives right now. I mean, right now we have, and this is summarization, but we have essentially three, four rich billionaires controlling the whole entire country
Yeah.
of 300 million people. And so this was the first step, is the conversation
Mm-hmm.
about some of the problems that we have with that. And we're going to continue to have these conversations because this is the pressing issue, is how to get people back in a position where they have power, how the working class can gain power again. And I think that this is the first step in the conversation. So we want
Yeah.
to, so with that being said, Seth, you got any final words?
I don't know. I think there's just so much more that could be said. We'll definitely have to have more conversations like this in the future. There's just, at the end of the day, information is the most important thing, and who controls information is also important. And we don't expect mainstream media to ever catch on to any of this. They're never going to report the truth. At this point, they're completely sold out to capital interests, and we just have to create our own information. We have to understand what's really happening in the world, because Trump is censoring shit. Like objectively speaking, we live in a different country than we did a couple months ago. Like, we don't have the same freedoms that we did, and we can't trust our government. And government is not, Democrats have always been the party of government. That whatever. That's not the case. We don't need to be the party of government, because this is what governments do: is they leverage rich and powerful people against the poor, and they take advantage of us inherently, and they're completely controlled by the rich. So unless we can take back the government and have it work in our own interests, we need to fight. We need to fight against the government.
Yeah.
We need to be the resistance. We need to stand against authoritarianism, because it's not going to stop itself. It's just going to push right over us if we don't. And same again, we will never have the same freedoms that we once enjoyed. And so this is a very, very important thing. And we need to be taking this seriously. And politics is not a hobby. It's not something that you are into or you're not into. You need to take your personal liberties seriously. And you need to educate your friends and your family.
Yeah.
And with that
Matt,
said, I'll let Matt have the final word.
that was good.
Yeah. Well,
So, Matt,
to build on that, before I say thank you and goodbye and everything, but to build on that too, get involved. Join. You can join. You can join. Start a union or learn how to start a union. You can join groups. You can do things. You can canvas. You can just get involved with things in your area, grassroots. You can start something. But it's important. One thing that we're lacking is organization and banding together. We absolutely could have power by numbers if we just got organized, and I can't advocate for that enough. I've done canvassing. I've done just getting involved with local Democrat chapters or whatever. Like, just getting involved with groups. it goes a long way. It can make a big difference. It teaches you the ins and outs of politics as well. So becoming part of an organization and learning how to organize is critical in my mind.
Yeah.
So, but
All
thank
right.
you guys.
Since Jesse's
It was really good talking to you guys. Hopefully,
Yeah, Matthew.
I appreciate
Matthew,
it.
before we let you go, do you have a Twitter handle so we can
I
follow you?
deleted Twitter, but I'm on
Or
Blue
Blue
Sky.
Sky.
Yeah.
Blue Sky, yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Blue Sky.
I abandoned Twitter, but I do have Blue Sky. It's Blue Sky at Legendary, 2 E's at the end instead of a Y at Legendary, Blue Sky.
Blue Sky.
And I'll
right,
post his link in the bio of the video too. So
Yeah,
make sure everybody follows you and gets in touch with you on Blue Sky. Gives you the support you need to.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Awesome, guys. Well, it was a pleasure once again for another week, and I hope you imagine more next week as we bring another episode of Imagine More. Thanks, guys.
All right, see
Thanks.
y'all.